Today we're making a simple 1x1 eagle. We're going to start this project by rounding 3 of these long edges, and that can be done with rough cuts. Something like that is good enough for now. Next we're going to divide this length in 4. And then this way we're going to divide this block in 3. Now from this point over here on the top, we're going to draw a curve that goes pretty much all the way here. And then it goes back to this line on the bottom. The thickest part, or the highest point of this curve, should be about here on this line. So that's where this curve reaches the furthest that way. And then we can remove all of this excess wood. So this line is the border over here, and then this curve marks where the back is going to be. So I can make just a few sweeping cuts over here. And then a little bit of finishing with smaller push cuts to get that curve nice and round. Next we can mark the halfway point of this bottom quarter and draw a straight line from here to this corner. And we can do the same thing on the other side. And now we're removing this bit of wood. I think this is easiest to do starting off with a few sweeping cuts. Then I'm moving on to rough cuts and push cuts. You can even use a saw for this and some sandpaper if you want a perfect flat finish. This is going to be the bottom of the bird. Now this can barely stay upright like this, but the balance is going to get better once we work on this part. And that's what we're going to do next. So over here in this square, I'm dividing this area in 3. And then I'm dividing this 1/3 in half. And now over here, we have the corner between the body and the feet. So all of this can be taken away, but then we're leaving some wood over here. And that can be done with stop cuts. Like that, and then the remaining piece is easy to take away with rough cuts. And some push cuts. Now this right here, the top quarter, is more than enough space we're gonna need for the head. So this way we're not gonna touch it yet, but this way it's obviously too thick. We're only gonna need about 1/3 of this thickness. So I'm dividing this in 3. And then starting from this line, I can extend it to the other side to make this a little bit easier. We're making some sweeping cuts. Something like that is good enough for now. Next we're going to work on this bottom part a little bit. So we want the body shape of this eagle to be a little bit more like a water droplet shape, instead of this blocky shape that is right now. And the thickest part is going to be here on this middle line. So I'm just drawing these 2 curves on the sides to help with perceiving the shape before making the cuts. And then I'm just making some rough cuts to remove some thickness from the sides. That's pretty good. Next I'm gonna turn this face on this top quarter into a single edge. And from above it's gonna look something like this. Just a triangular shape. And again I can make some sweeping cuts so that this edge will only appear on this top quarter, since we want this to have a lot more mass. Next we're going to make a basic shape for the head. And that I'm gonna want it to be like a hook shape like that. This is the underside. And there's a straight line like that. And then a curve where the neck is gonna meet the chest. And then here on the top side of the neck, we're making this corner round. And then here on the back of the head, that corner is also going to be round. Something like that. And over here I'm making a stop cut, but it's gonna be in an angle. And with this, it's important not to press the blade too deep into the wood, because the deeper you press, the harder you're gonna have to press, which means that it's easier to chip off this entire thing. So just a little bit at a time, and then we can make some sweeping cut motions over here. Something like that is good enough for now. Next we're creating a V shape here on the back. So just something like this. And then with a few sweeping cuts, we can remove these lines that we just made. This I think is actually one of the biggest benefits of a Sloyd knife, because with this rounder edge, I can reach inward, creating dents like this. Now don't worry if you have a straight edge on your blade, you can just make this as a two-sided stop cut. So you cut here, and then you just create a flat surface. Before we go any further, we can do some rounding so we can take away all of these unnecessary sharp edges. We're not going to touch this yet or this, but everything else can be made a little bit rounder. And the most important cut for this step is this very shallow push cut. Next we're going to carve the wings, and from the front here they're just going to be two lines like this. Be sure to leave a lot of space here in the middle for the chest, so the wings are here on the sides, they don't come here close to the center. And then these lines curve all the way very close to the bottom here, because the wings of an eagle almost reach as far down as the tail. This part right here can be a little bit more straight, so below this corner it can be pretty much like a straight line, and then over here we have that curvature. Yep, that's better. And then we're going to carve this with some stop cuts. So you can press the blade into the wood along the line like this, and then we can cut towards the line. Now here on the tail, I think it makes sense to make a few sweeping cuts first, because it's safer. Now we have this corner here that can be cleaned with these stop cuts. Notice here that I'm not cutting from all the way down here, because we want to leave as much mass over here on the bottom as possible. That's going to be the stand for the eagle, and if it has too little mass, the eagle is going to tip over. Then over here on the top, I think these kinds of V-cuts are easier, like that. So from one side cutting with the tip of the blade, and from the other cutting with the long edge of the blade. And then we can make these edges on the side of the body a little bit rounder. Then up here, with a few sweeping cuts, we can connect this V-cut smoothly into these already existing sweeping cuts. Then we're going to make the edges of the tail. So the line we're going to draw starts from about the middle of this part of the wing. So measuring from this corner all the way over here, about in the middle of this section of the wing. And then we go down with a slight angle. Same over here. That's good. Next we're going to make the feet. I reserved a little more space over here so that we can adjust the proportions, but now we're going to need to take this slightly further down. Starting from the top of the wings, I'm going to divide this eagle in 3 parts, and over here on the lowest third line is where I think the feet should be. Looks about right. So I'm going to move this line a bit further down. I'm also bringing this lower part of the stomach further in. That way we can keep this eagle a little bit more top heavy, the way it's supposed to be. So the stomach curves in like that. And then the feet are going to start pretty much from the edges of the wings. Now we can work on this edge. So we don't want to take away this corner because that's the furthest away point on the bottom over here. And if I just make this round, the eagle is probably not going to stay in balance. So instead I'm going to do something like this. I'm making this edge straight and the parts below it a little bit round. Something like that. And then I'm making this edge rounder so that it's closer to the shape of curving toes, like that. And then I can make a little distinction between the feet and the piece of wood that the eagle is sitting on. Next I'm going to make a V-cut here in the middle. Just something like that. And then 2 more V-cuts per side to separate the toes from each other. Then over here, I'll need to take away some of this mass from the side of the last toe by creating this 2-sided stop cut. Like that. And then to make the shape of the toes a little bit nicer, I'm making the toes pointy. And this just takes a few very small stop cuts. Now I'm also going to make a V-cut over here to separate the wings from each other a little bit. Over here there's no need to do that, but somewhere here a small V-cut adds a little bit of nice detail. And a few of these longer push cuts will add kind of like a feather pattern on the wings. I think it's a nice detail that makes a surprisingly big difference. And then above those longer cuts we can make a few medium-sized cuts before the texture fades in to the smoother parts of the back. Here I'm just adding a feather pattern on the edge of the tail with a few very small V-cuts. Next we're going to work on the head shape a little bit. And we're going to start with this curve. So we want to create a distinction between the beak and the head. And we can do that with a few sweeping cuts. Like that. Then we can make the beak a little bit smoother. And we can turn those sweeping cuts into V cuts. And a few more V cuts over here. To create this sharp corner over here. And then a couple sweeping cuts can be used to create that hook shape on the underside of the beak. Then I'm making 2 V cuts. I'm extending this corner of the beak slightly further back for a little bit more of a realistic beak shape. And now it's time for the final adjustments. If you feel like there's still some proportional issues that need to be fixed, I'm taking away a little bit of this mass from the back of the head, making some areas slightly smoother. You can also add a little bit of texture to the piece of wood that the eagle is sitting on if you want. And then that's it for the project. One more detail actually, and that's this small triangular shape that we're gonna make.